Lecture 19, Part 6. Should be the last video. I know you're excited. So we were talking about Watergate. Okay? I'm going to get to the next slide. Okay? I told you that I didn't need you to know Haldeman's one of Nixon's guys. Sirica's a judge. Irwin is a committee guy in Congress for looking into this. Archibald Cox was a special prosecutor. I don't expect you to know any of those. I said I want you to know Gerald Ford. Okay. I said Nixon, they were drawing up articles of impeachment. A vote was never taken. Nixon realizes that there's a lot going on. Republicans are telling him they don't think if it gets to the Senate they can save him. Possibly. He could have fought on, of course. See, but I told you that Nixon will decide to resign the presidency, which he does. Okay? So, how does Gerald Ford fit in? Okay, people you don't need to know. 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 See how this just goes on and on and on. Gerald Ford. When Nixon resigns, Gerald Ford becomes president. He's the vice president. Wait a minute, Mr. Ferguson. I thought you said Spiro Agnew was vice president. Well, Agnew has run into trouble of his own. Nothing to do with Watergate. He's run into like tax evasion issues or something. I forget exactly what it was. But Agnew had resigned as vice president, thus leaving a vacancy in the office. So under that new constitutional amendment that had been passed after Kennedy was assassinated, because when they passed that one, I had to look that up. There's now a procedure in place to appoint a new vice president. Now, you're not going to have a whole election just to do a vice president. So here's how this kind of works. The president nominates someone, because the vice president is supposed to work with the president. The president nominates someone. Okay, if I recall. You know what? Let me just look at the amendment real quick and make sure I don't tell you wrong. Because I can pause this. I'm back. Yeah. All right. So I told you need to know Gerald Ford. So I looked in the textbook. When all else fails, look in the textbook. It's the 25th Amendment, which is what I said it was. It was passed in 1967. After Kennedy was assassinated. So remember, Kennedy was assassinated. Johnson became president. There was no vice president. So, 25th Amendment, 1967. Look, you have a head start on your government class next year. All right. So Agnew has resigned. There's a vacancy for vice president. The president, of course, has to work with a vice president. So here's how it works. The president nominates a candidate. Okay? Yeah. Okay, this person then has to pass a vote of both houses of Congress. Okay, so you nominate someone, and then the House of Representatives has to vote to accept him, and then the Senate has to vote to accept him. And that's how you get a new vice president if there's a vacancy. That way, you don't have to wait for the next presidential election to come along. Okay, I suppose I could have set it up. We could actually run a national election to get the vice president slot filled, but is a vice president slot really that important? Normally, no. All right. So Agnew has resigned. There's an opening. Nixon suggests Ford. Okay, Ford was a congressman from Michigan or Minnesota, one of those states up by the Great Lakes. Okay, he was a kind of a moderate, middle-of-the-road Republican. Because remember, you have to get this person through a vote of the Congress. Okay. All right. So if you do a far right winger, then the Democrats might not support him. So Ford was one of those likable guys that everybody got along with. He was kind of in the middle, so Democrats had some common ground with him. Of course, he was a Republican. Republicans had some common ground. So it was kind of one of those average guys that everybody I could live with Gerald Ford as vice president. So Gerald Ford becomes vice president. When Nixon resigns, Ford becomes president. So, Gerald Ford is the only person to have been president who never stood for election on some kind of national basis. Okay, Either you ran as president or you ran as vice president, which, yeah, come on, everybody's really voting for the president, but at least you had to go through the electoral process. Okay. Ford, I mean, was elected in a way. He was elected by the House of Representatives and the Senate. They okayed his position. This does put Ford into the position of being an unelected president in most people's eyes. Okay? Now, Ford will do something else. Okay, that will irritate some people. He will go ahead and pardon Richard Nixon for any crimes that he might have committed during this Watergate thing. Now, this is controversial, okay? Because Nixon hasn't been found guilty of anything. So can you actually pardon someone before they've been found guilty? Okay. Now, there's two schools of thought. There's two ways to look at this. One, if a president is guilty of crimes, no man or woman is supposed to be above the law. Okay? All right. And so when Ford pardons Nixon, it seemed like, well, we'll never get to find out. Nixon will never have to have his day in court. Okay, he'll never be. We'll never have a chance to find him guilty of something. Now, there's other people say, well, Nixon made a deal with Ford. Maybe Nixon told Ford, well, look, I really don't want to be impeached. And impeachment would not be being found guilty of. I mean, it wouldn't be a criminal sentence. He wouldn't be like removed from the White House and then sent to jail. They'd have to do a separate, trial for that. Did Nixon say to Ford, look, I'll go ahead and resign. You can be president. If you'll pardon me, I'll do that. Maybe. I mean, I suppose that's possible. Ford did write a memoir. I've never read it. It was something to the effect of, I don't know if he wrote the memoir or if it was an autobiography where he talked to somebody, but it was called basically Print It When I'm Dead. Okay, when I'm dead, you can talk about this. Okay. Ford always maintained that he just didn't think the country needed to go through any more turmoil. Okay? And maybe that's what Nixon might have done too. Okay, so here's a question. Did Nixon resign because he knew he was guilty and that he was going to be removed from office eventually, and he thought if he resigned he could get better treatment? Or did he see the writing on the wall and decide rather than fight it out, he just wasn't going to put the country through that kind of turmoil and trauma? I try to be forgiving of people and try to see their better side where possible. So I like to think, I mean, I can't see it in Nixon's heart. I've never read his book either. I'd like to think maybe he realized that he would be fighting a losing battle and that it would be unhealthy for the country to go through it. And maybe that's what Ford did too. I mean, oh sure, when Nixon resigns, that takes impeachment off the table because he's not president anymore. But you could still bring some kind of criminal charges against him for obstruction of justice. But what Ford's looking at maybe is like, man, this has been going on for like 2 to 3 years. The country's in turmoil. People are losing confidence in the government. Is it going to gain anything? I mean, okay, we find Nixon guilty of conspiracy or something. He goes to jail for 2 years. Is that really going to make anybody feel better about the country? Well, it might make a few people feel better. I don't know. There's people who want to see Hillary Clinton in jail because she violated various espionage acts, and other people are going, in the grand scheme of things, is that going to make things any better? But there's people who go, well, she should be in jail. No one's supposed to be above the law. So you can make this argument back and forth, okay, depending where you come down. I personally think, this is my opinion, that maybe Ford did the right thing, that we could put this ugliness behind us and move forward. Okay, Nixon's gone. Isn't that what you wanted, to get him out? Now he's gone. So let's get going. Okay. But with Ford in office, then we're going to wrap up this sad Vietnam story. Okay. Here's Nixon resigning, by the way. That's one of his daughters looking on, if I recall. He'll always be her dad. All right, we got the spinning Microsoft spiral of death. So I don't know if that went through. Here's Nixon resigning. I think that's one of his daughters looking on. That'll always be her dad, right? Okay. Nixon resigns. Ford's president. In 1975, here's the headline. Nixon resigns. He urges a time of healing, says Nixon. Here's what I'm looking for. In 1975, the sad Vietnam saga finally ends. Okay. After we left Vietnam, the North continued to put pressure on South Vietnam. Okay. In 1973, they tried to invade. South Vietnamese forces, with the support of some American air power, if I recall, successfully stopped the invasion. But then in 1975, the North Vietnamese do it again. They invade South Vietnam. Okay? And this time, the South Vietnamese can't hold. And previously, you knew with Nixon in charge, but if you try to do anything really bad against South Vietnam, that Nixon might, use American military might to protect South Vietnam. But now Nixon's gone. Okay? And while even if Ford was willing to do it, to try to protect South Vietnam, there is not the political support in the country or in Congress. Okay? The Democrats are kind of, holding Ford's feet to the fire. Ford's an unelected president. He doesn't have a lot of political clout. And so South Vietnam falls. Okay? That bottom one's the last helicopter. That's your last chance to get out of Saigon if you're an American or a South Vietnamese official who'd worked with the Americans. And of course, the communists take over. And guess what we get? Re-education camps, secret police, purges, all the usual stuff. And this is where we got a lot of Vietnamese into the United States, because a lot of them fled the country because they knew they had targets on their back, and a lot of them came to the United States. Those pictures on the top are basically anyone in South Vietnam who had access to a helicopter and who had to fly it was heading out to sea trying to find an American aircraft carrier to land on, to get out. Okay? All right. So the long nightmare in Vietnam is over. So we've lost the president. Vietnam has fallen. Things are looking really grim. People are really depressed. Now, I got a couple of minutes here, so I tacked on a quick slide at the end. Something happens in 76 to give people an idea, something to start feeling good about the country again. It's the American Bicentennial. Historically, is this important? Nah, not so much. It's the 200th anniversary of the United States. Okay, it was a big party. People were talking about history and looking at old things and looking back at where we've been. And in the grand scheme of things, historically, it might not have been that significant. But I'll tell you, at the time, it was kind of a feel-good thing because we've been through this beating, okay, with Nixon and Watergate and Vietnam and the assassinations, and for a little while everybody was proud again, and you were celebrating the United States. So I think that's kind of a big thing. Now, 76 is also an election year. President Ford will run for election. I mean, he's already in the White House, okay? He will run for election, but remember, he was an unelected president, and his brand is somewhat tainted by the fact that he's pardoned Nixon. Some people hold that against him. His Democratic opponent is a guy named Jimmy Carter, who's the governor of Georgia. Okay, so Ford's on the right, Carter's on the left. Okay, Carter will eke out. Well, not eke. I mean, he will win. It's not a blowout. Okay, I'll put the election map up. And of course, I'm covering the key code there. But this one, I think Carter is who won? Blue. Carter's in blue. Okay, so see, Ford won a lot of states. He got like 48% of the popular vote. So I mean, he didn't get slaughtered like McGovern, but he does lose, and Jimmy Carter takes the White House. Okay, but that sadly is where we're out of time. This is where the course ends. I might do an extra bonus thing on the space program for fun. We'll see about that. But here's where my narrative runs out. Okay? And I'm okay with that, because from this point on, we're getting to things that happened in my lifetime, which means it's not history anymore. It's just current events. But to you, it would be history. Yeah, that's the problem. Second half of class out of time. Bye.